All right, so today we're diving into a case that's pretty fascinating and disturbing.
Yeah.
The story of DeWayne Lee Harris.
hmm
You might know him as the Seattle Shoelace Slasher.
Yeah, that's quite a nickname
It is.
for a man who committed some truly horrific crimes back in the late 90s in Seattle.
Yeah, and you've asked us to really dig into this case, who Harris was,
Right.
what he did,
Yeah.
and what it all means. And we've
Yep.
got some pretty good sources here.
Yeah.
A good mix from Wikipedia to news articles,
Oh, wow.
even a podcast interview where Harris himself speaks.
Wow, that's always intriguing,
Yeah,
though often unsettling
Yeah.
to hear the perpetrator's own words.
for sure.
But before we get there,
Yeah.
what do we know about Harris's background?
Well, that's one of the strange things about this case is that our sources are surprisingly silent about his early life.
Oh,
It's almost like he just emerges fully formed,
interesting.
already on this dark path.
That absence of context definitely adds to the mystery. Makes it harder to understand the why behind his actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's turn to the crimes themselves.
Okay.
What can you tell us about his modus operandi,
Yeah,
the patterns in his crimes?
the pattern is definitely there.
Yeah.
Strangulation was his primary method,
Okay.
and he consistently used shoelaces to bind his victims.
Mhm.
There's also a chilling specificity to his choice of disposal sites.
Oh,
He often left his victims in a place known as the jungle.
the jungle.
Yeah, a dense area under Seattle's freeways.
The jungle doesn't sound like a place you'd want to stumble into,
No.
even without knowing its connection to these crimes,
Right.
just the name itself.
Yeah. And it was, and unfortunately still is, a place where many homeless people live, kind of a hidden world within the city.
Wow.
And Harris seems to have exploited that isolation,
Yeah.
targeting women who were less likely to be missed.
We'll talk about some of these women.
Okay.
His first confirmed victim was Denise Marie Harris.
Okay.
No relation.
Mm.
Who he met on First Avenue.
Yeah. It's a sobering reminder that a seemingly random encounter can turn deadly.
Absolutely. And the level of violence that he inflicted on Denise Marie is truly horrifying.
Yeah.
He strangled her,
Oh, wow.
partially removed her clothes, bound her hands and ankles with shoelaces, and even stuffed her bra into her mouth.
That's not just about ending a life.
No.
It seems almost ritualistic, a need to exert control and dehumanize.
Yeah. What do criminologists make of details like that?
They're often seen as indicators of a deeper psychological disturbance.
Okay.
In this case, it might suggest a desire for power, a need to dominate and degrade.
Right.
But without more information about Harris's background, it's difficult to draw firm conclusions.
Yeah. His second victim, Antoinette Jones,
Mm-hmm.
met a similar fate. Harris accused her of stealing drugs and then strangled her with a leather belt again, using shoelaces to bind her.
Wow.
And her remains weren't found for months.
Can you imagine the agony her loved ones must have endured during those long months of uncertainty?
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
It speaks to the devastating ripple effect of these crimes.
Yeah.
The trauma that extends far beyond the immediate victims.
And then there's Olivia Smith,
Okay.
his final confirmed victim.
Hmm.
Again, their meeting involved drugs, but this time there was a violent fight.
Okay.
Harris stabbed Olivia multiple times and slashed her throat.
Oh my gosh.
And unlike the previous cases, he didn't even try to conceal her body, just left it on a stairwell.
That's a significant escalation in violence.
Yeah.
It's as though he's becoming bolder, more reckless.
Right.
Some might even say more confident in his ability to evade capture.
But capture him they did.
Yeah.
And this is where the case takes a truly bizarre turn.
Okay.
He wasn't apprehended through traditional investigative work.
Right.
He actually called a detective himself.
He did.
He did,
Wow.
and offered to lead them to the murderer.
That's a mind-boggling move.
Yeah.
Almost like he was playing a game with the authorities, toying with them.
So they bring him in, and then comes the confession.
Wait.
He admits to the 3 murders, even calling it his hobby.
His hobby.
Yeah, this isn't just someone who committed crimes. This is someone who seems to relish the act of killing.
Yeah, it's a deeply disturbing admission.
It is.
That word hobby
Yeah.
suggests a chilling detachment from the human cost of his actions.
Right.
It certainly raises questions about his psychological state,
Right.
perhaps pointing towards a psychopathic personality.
And that confession led to a $5 million bail.
Wow.
Clearly, the authorities recognized that they weren't dealing with an ordinary criminal, but things were about to get even stranger during his trial.
Oh boy, the trial itself is a whole other chapter in this story.
Yeah.
A chapter that reveals even more about the unsettling nature of DeWayne Lee Harris.
Yeah. Oh boy. So we've got this confession, this glimpse into a very dark mind. What happens when DeWayne Lee Harris faces a judge and jury?
Well, his behavior in court was as unsettling as his crimes.
Yeah.
He was so disruptive
Oh, really?
that he had to be strapped to a restraining chair
Oh, wow.
throughout the trial. And then after the guilty verdict was read, he started laughing.
Laughing. It's hard to imagine the impact that must have had on the victims' families. Seeing the man who took their loved ones from them react with such blatant disregard.
Absolutely. It's a complete lack of remorse.
Yeah.
Almost a sense of enjoyment
Really?
at the attention he was receiving. It definitely supports the idea that we're dealing with someone with a profound psychological disturbance.
And it gets worse.
Mhm.
He actually addressed the judge, saying there were others like him out there, that nobody was safe.
Right.
What was he trying to achieve with that statement?
It's difficult to say for certain,
Yeah.
but it could have been a way of trying to exert control,
Right.
even from his position of defeat.
I see.
He was essentially saying, you may have caught me, but the danger isn't gone.
Wow.
It's a way of extending his power, spreading fear even from behind bars.
It's almost like he was seeking to create a legacy of terror to make sure his crimes resonated even after he was locked away.
You could definitely interpret it that way. And then there's the statement he made about how there's no true justice because he's still alive, still has privileges in prison.
That seems like a very calculated attempt to minimize the impact of his actions, to downplay the enormity of what he did.
It's a common tactic
Nah.
among those who display psychopathic traits.
Right.
They often try to shift the focus away from their own responsibility to deflect blame and control the narrative.
But then almost in the same breath, he expresses hope for the family's forgiveness. It feels so disingenuous given everything else he said and did.
Like, it does seem contradictory, doesn't it?
It does.
Was it a genuine expression of remorse?
Right.
Or simply another manipulation tactic? We'll likely never know for sure. But regardless of his intentions, it's unlikely to offer much comfort to those whose lives he shattered.
So in the end, he was sentenced to 94 years. Seems like justice was served? Or was it?
Well, on the surface, it does seem like a just punishment.
Yeah.
But remember that chilling claim he made?
Oh, yeah.
That he was responsible for 32 other murders.
That's not just a casual boast.
No.
That's a staggering number. And if it's true, it means the scope of his crimes is far greater than what he was officially convicted of. Have authorities investigated those claims?
Unfortunately, no corroborating evidence has ever been found.
Wow.
So we're left with this haunting question.
Yeah.
Was he exaggerating?
Right.
Was it a bid for notoriety?
Hmm.
Or are there really dozens more victims out there? Their stories untold.
This is where the jungle, his preferred disposal site, becomes even more significant.
Exactly. It was a place that was already shrouded in mystery and danger.
Right.
A place where people could easily disappear. If he was targeting vulnerable women living in those hidden spaces,
Right.
it's entirely possible that some of his victims might never be identified.
And that brings us to the concept of geographic profiling.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that plays into this case?
Sure, geographic profiling is a technique used by investigators to analyze the spatial patterns of a criminal's activities. In Harris's case, his choice of the jungle as a disposal site could tell us a lot about his routines, his knowledge of the city,
Okay.
and the types of victims he was seeking out.
So if those 32 other murders were real, would understanding his movements and patterns help connect the dots?
Absolutely, by mapping out his known crime scenes and any potential locations related to his claims,
Yeah.
investigators might be able to identify areas where other victims could have been found.
Okay.
It's like piecing together a puzzle using geography as a key to unlock the bigger picture.
But even if those claims remain unverified, they cast a long shadow over this case.
You're right. The possibility that we only know a fraction of the truth about DeWayne Lee Harris is truly chilling.
Yeah.
And it adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of this man and his motives.
And his story didn't end in the courtroom despite his crimes. He managed to attract a fair amount of media attention.
That's right. His case was featured in several true crime documentaries.
Oh,
including the first episode of the docudrama Real Detective and an episode of American Detective.
and he even gave a podcast interview from prison.
He did in 2021.
Oh, wow.
He spoke with the host of Unforbidden Truth,
Okay.
a podcast that delves into the minds of some of the world's most notorious criminals.
So for anyone listening who wants to dive even deeper into this case, there's plenty of material out there.
Absolutely. And it's worth considering why these stories continue to fascinate us.
Yeah.
Is it a morbid curiosity? a desire to understand the darkness that exists within humanity.
Or perhaps it's a way of trying to make sense of the senseless, to find meaning in the midst of tragedy.
Whatever the reason, it's important to remember the human cost of these crimes.
Yeah.
The victims, their families,
Right.
and the communities forever scarred by violence. They deserve our attention and empathy, even as we try to unravel the mystery of DeWayne Lee Harris.
Okay, so we've explored his crimes, the trial, his unsettling behavior, the chilling possibility of more victims. But what does it all mean?
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways for our listener today?
Yeah, it feels like we've been through a whirlwind of information, you know?
Yeah.
We've seen the brutality,
Right.
the lack of remorse,
Right.
the calculated manipulations.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard to wrap your head around it all.
It is a lot to process, and I think one of the most unsettling takeaways is that even with a conviction and a lengthy sentence,
Right.
there's still this sense of unease,
Yeah.
of unanswered questions that linger.
Like that cloud of uncertainty surrounding those potential 32 other victims.
Exactly.
It's just a chilling thought, and it raises a lot of questions about how someone like DeWayne Lee Harris could operate undetected for so long.
It speaks to the vulnerability of certain populations,
Yeah.
particularly those living on the fringes of society, like
Right.
those in the jungle.
Right.
They're often less likely to report crimes.
Right. Or be noticed when they go missing, and that makes them easy targets for predators like Harris.
And you mentioned geographic profiling earlier.
Yeah.
Could that technique be applied retrospectively, even now, to potentially shed light on those other claims?
It's certainly possible. Even though years have passed, investigators could still use the data from his known crimes, combined with any additional information he might have revealed in interviews or writings,
Okay.
to create a map of his potential activity.
It's almost like trying to track a ghost. But if it could bring closure to even one family, it would be worth the effort.
Absolutely. And beyond the investigative angle, there's also the psychological aspect.
Right.
We've touched on psychopathy a few times.
Yeah.
But what are some of the key characteristics that might have been at play in Harris's case?
Well, his lack of empathy and remorse stands out.
Right.
You know, he seemed to derive pleasure from inflicting pain and controlling others.
Yeah.
And that manipulative behavior, even during his trial, speaks to a deep-seated need for power.
Exactly. And those are all classic hallmarks of psychopathy.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that it's a spectrum, not a simple on-off switch.
Right.
And even within that diagnosis,
Yeah.
there can be a wide range of motivations and behaviors.
So we might never fully understand what drove him to commit such horrific acts.
That's true, but by exploring these psychological complexities, we can at least start to grapple with the darkness that exists within human nature.
And that brings us back to the listener,
Right.
to the so what of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
What can we learn from a case like this? How can we protect ourselves and others from becoming victims?
I think the most important takeaway is awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the vulnerabilities that exist within our communities.
Right.
To recognize the signs of potential danger
Okay.
and to speak up when we see something that feels wrong.
It's about being vigilant without becoming paranoid.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between trusting our instincts
Yeah.
and not succumbing to fear.
Right.
And it's about creating a culture where people feel safe coming forward, whether they're victims themselves or witnesses to something suspicious.
And it's about supporting organizations that work with vulnerable populations.
Yes.
Like those living in the jungle.
Absolutely.
They often lack the resources and support systems that could help protect them from exploitation.
Yeah, and on a more personal level,
Yeah.
it's about educating ourselves about the warning signs of predatory behavior.
Okay.
Understanding the tactics that someone like Harris might use to gain trust and manipulate victims.
Knowledge is power, they say.
Yeah,
And in this case, it could be the power to prevent another tragedy from happening.
exactly.
But even with all the awareness and precautions, there's still a sobering reality to acknowledge.
You're right, we can't control the actions of others, and
Yeah.
that inherent unpredictability of human nature,
Yeah.
especially when dealing with someone like DeWayne Lee Harris,
Right.
is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire case.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the gruesome details of the crimes to the psychological complexities of the perpetrator. But I think it's crucial to end by remembering the victims.
Absolutely. Denise Harris, Antoinette Jones, Olivia Smith,
Yeah.
their names should not be forgotten. And we must continue to fight for justice, not just for them, but for all those who have been affected by violence and exploitation.
So that's our deep dive into the chilling world of the Seattle Shoelace Slasher. A case that leaves us with more questions that answers a lingering sense of unease and a profound reminder of the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people.
If there's one thing I hope our listener takes away from this, it's the importance of staying informed, staying aware, and staying connected to those around you, because sometimes the best way to fight the darkness is to shine a light on it.